Last year, ahead of the by-election in Clacton, our guest of the day, Matthew Paris, wrote a rather controversial column. This is his job, of course. In it, he suggested that the seaside town represented a Britain that was, quote, going nowhere. Perhaps, he said, the Tories should let go of places like Clacton and instead focus on places with more ambition and drive, like Cambridge. Well, Clacton ended up being a stonking win for UKIP, so does that mean other seats like it are lost to the Conservatives? BBC Look East's Mike Liggins has been up the coast to Great Yarmouth to find out more.
They call it the Golden Mile. Amusement arcades, cafes and restaurants. The Britannia Pier, where last summer you could have seen Des O'Connor and the Chuckle Brothers, among others. Every summer thousands come here on holiday. And unsurprisingly, the town's Tory MP is keen to sell it.
When you've got constituencies like mine, where I've got fantastic people in a developing energy industry that's creating jobs, a 41% fall in unemployment in Great Yarmouth in the last few years, that shows we're a forward-thinking area, really looking to the future and still able to offer that great traditional British seaside holiday offer that people across the country want.
A great place to go on holiday, but you don't have to look far to find houses and pubs boarded up. Only this week, Marks and Spencer left town.
Do you think the Conservative Party care much about places like Yarmouth?
No.
Which party cares most about places like Yarmouth?
Well, I don't know. I really don't know.
Do any of them care much about?
I don't think so, no.
Out of the three parties that really count, I should imagine UKIP would.
Well, it's the end of an era.
UKIP have 11 seats on the local council, and music teacher Alan Gray is their candidate for the general election. He'd be more than happy for the Tories to abandon Great Yarmouth, but isn't holding his breath. He simply believes people in this town are ready for change.
Yarmouth on the whole feels like it's been forgotten, and I believe it's been forgotten for quite a number of years. We've had many promises, but not a lot of action, and I would like now for the rest of the country to take UKIP a lot more seriously.
Labour candidate Laura Norris doesn't particularly care for politicos talking down to the electorate. She says politicians need to stop bickering and start getting what she calls real people involved in the process.
What we're trying to do is to offer something really real and fundamental and authentic. And that's what I want people to vote for. Not for me, because this isn't about me. This is about people and their choices, and I want them to vote for the Labour Party because I think it gives people the very best choice at the next election. But I also want them to be able to be part of that discussion and be out there involved in politics.
Of course, the Conservative Party won't abandon seaside towns like Great Yarmouth any more than it would choose the Chuckle Brothers to lead the party into the general election, because there are votes to be won. It will be tight here, mind. Brandon Lewis's majority is just over 4,000. He's already put up a billboard, although why he chose not to use the word Conservative on the billboard is anyone's guess.
Well, we're joined now by the academic watcher of all things UKIP, Matthew Goodwin, and of course Matthew Paris is here too. Do you regret writing that column now about Clacton?
No, I don't. I didn't especially like the headline that seemed to suggest that I thought the Conservative Party shouldn't care about places like Clacton. The Conservative Party must care, any government must care, about seaside towns that are struggling, but they must not write their manifestos on the basis of what people in those places think, which is not typical of the rest of Britain.
Well, didn't it reek of sort of metropolitan snobbery?
Well, certainly quite a few people in Clacton thought so, UKIP thought so, and I suppose if you're honest about a place that is struggling, is failing, which in many ways British seaside towns are, you do run the danger of sounding snobbish, but I was trying to be honest. These places are Conservative with a small c. Surely it's not realistic for the Tories to give up on hoping to win them. No, it isn't. The Tories must campaign. But I thought you said that they should turn their back on them. No, I didn't. I said that we shouldn't listen to their opinions when framing our manifestos. That's the important thing. We shouldn't turn our backs on any part of the country or any of our countrymen, but there is a danger that because there are isolated pockets in Britain, numerous isolated pockets, where people are A, right-wing, and B, things are going wrong for them, that a right-of-centre party like the Conservative Party should try to frame its manifesto around those views. In doing so, it may win back a few votes from UKIP, but it's going to lose a lot of votes in the centre ground. What do you say to that?
Well, it's an interesting idea. I think the problem is that it's a recipe for election suicide for the Conservative Party. At the last election, the Conservatives won 32 out of 38 seats along the East Coast, lots of seats like Great Yarmouth and Clacton.
Is it the East Coast of England between the
pretty much
Thames
from
estuary
Hull all the way down to
Hull?
Yeah, and that now is very much sort of the UKIP heartland as such. The Conservatives, at the same time, are not seeing the kind of gains among young people, minorities, that would offset those losses in those eastern areas. But I mean, underlying the electoral arithmetic is a more fundamental point, which is that, you know, I think many people felt that the article compounded a narrative that UKIP argues is coming out of London and the media, which is that, you know, these voters are not worth listening to, or they shouldn't dictate where parties stand.
Well, you don't think they are worth listening to, do you?
I would certainly listen to them. But in the end, I agree they shouldn't dictate where parties stand.
But do they dictate, or don't they just influence these parties? They don't, not aware of Tory policy being dictated, though I'm sure they'll take into... There's no point in listening to somebody if you don't at least take into account what they're saying.
Well, you can listen so that you know what they think, and then you can decide whether you agree with it or not. The Conservative Party are not dictated to by UKIP supporters, but I think elements in the Conservative Party are running scared of UKIP and are listening too hard.
But I think the point that Matthew was making, the other Matthew, was...
Are all your guests getting
yes,
called
they
Matthew?
Are.
In fact, I'm changing my name by default. Matthew Hancock.
I'm not.
That's Matthew. And
I'm staying with Joe.
We're going to call you Matty. The fact is that if I can put it this way, your Notting Hill strategy has failed to reach out and capture traditional non-Conservative votes. So would it not be the height of stupidity to actually turn your back on traditional Conservative voters until you found some new voters that support you?
There's no point in just clinging to the wreckage. You've got to strike out. And I don't agree that the Conservative Party is failing to interest people in the centre ground. I don't agree that the Conservative Party is failing to interest people in the parts of Britain where things are going better.
Is there evidence that they are?
Well, right now, 8% of those who are planning to vote for the Conservatives in May are like those voters in Matthew's article from Clacton. Now, can the Conservative Party afford essentially to lose 8 points? I would say no. If the Conservatives were listening to these voters more proactively, they would have a more commanding lead in the opinion polls and they would have a majority without a problem. The challenge facing both Labour and the Conservatives now is that UKIP's electorate is now the most working class electorate in British politics, and they are having that conversation with those voters. Now, I know it's a nice idea that these mainstream parties should go in a more sort of liberal, progressive future, and this generational argument is one that is playing out in America and Western Europe. The problem is everybody underestimates just how long that generational change takes.
You can have the conversation until the cows come home, but I'm all in favour of conversations, but in the end it's whether you dance to the tune of those to whom you've spoken. Now, you say 8%. Were the media to concur in headlines that the Conservative Party has lurched to the right to embrace UKIP's values and beliefs, and were the public to believe that, that would cost the Conservative Party much more than 8% at the next general election.
I don't think it's either or. It's not you either talk to UKIP voters.
It is either or.
Well, I would argue elections and voting behaviour is more nuanced than either going for the middle ground or going for these left behind voters. I think there is a middle ground. Absolutely. And I think having a conversation about the number one most important issue for many of these UKIP voters is the right thing to do. I think right now 40% of working class voters in Britain feel they have no voice in government. That has never been higher in British political history.
And isn't that very dangerous, Matthew Paris, that if what Americans would call blue-collar workers, working-class voters, particularly older working-class voters, if they feel that the mainstream leadership, Conservative and Labour and Lib Dem, are sneering at them, have no real interest. They may listen to them in a patronising way, but no way is it going to influence the policies they stand for. Isn't that the way you end up with a woman we just saw on our screens? You end up with Marine Le Pen.
You're generalising in a way that's actually rather patronising. Skegness, Clacton, places like that are not really blue-collar workers. Blue-collar workers are a quite identifiable and rather different group. I think they're a very important part of the electorate, and that they're part of the future as well as the past.
But there's a lot of working class and lower middle class voters in these places. and they don't feel
Yes.
that the mainstream parties speak for them. Now, it looks like UKIP will be the beneficiary of that for the moment. By how much, we don't know. You can tell me in a minute. But there's also a danger it goes much worse than that. If you look at the kind of people who now vote for Marine Le Pen, they are overwhelmingly working class, disillusioned people. A lot of them used to vote communist.
And what Marine Le Pen is going to need to do, if she's to get anywhere near power, is to appeal to the rest of France, that part of France that is not those people. And that's where she's going to struggle. That's where UKIP would always struggle. And the Conservative Party, which does have the potency to appeal to the centre ground, would let go of it at its peril.
Mrs. Thatcher, you're a great heroine. She would never have let these people go. They were her people.
Mrs. Thatcher spoke to all kinds of people, and we should speak to all kinds of people, but Mrs. Thatcher, as a Prime Minister, as a leader, actually ploughed a pretty middling furrow. She didn't lurch to the right or the left.
We've got Al Murray now standing in, I think it's the seat that is going to be contested by Nigel Farage, and I think we can just run a clip of him and then have a brief word about what this might mean. This is Al Murray, the pub landlord.
It seems to me that the UK is ready for a bloke waving a pint around offering common sense solutions. Cheers. That is why I am here to announce my intention to run for election as Member of Parliament for the constituency of South Thanet. Let it be known that, like many of the parliamentary hopefuls in the forthcoming election, I have no idea where South Thanet is.
Well, he may not, but what do you think is going to do for Nigel Farage's chances?
Well, I think novelty candidates will hit all of the political parties. I predict he'll get no more than 5% of the vote. I've seen his tour schedule. He's in Scandinavia 2 weeks before the election.
Oh, really?
And I think it's more of a sort of
This is
PR.
Al Murray, not
Al Murray.
Not Nigel Farage.
I think it's more of a PR exercise. But Thanet South is interesting, obviously, because, again, you've got those disillusioned Labour voters who Labour should be picking up. I'm not convinced yet Labour are investing heavily in that seat. At the same time, you've got those Eurosceptic Conservatives who have been turning in UKIP's direction over the last year. So these sort of Kent seats are interesting because you have that coalition of disillusioned Tories and Labour, which a year ago, of course, everybody said this is not happening, this is just a byproduct of Conservative divisions.
The question is not how many people are going to vote for Al Murray. A tiny number of people will vote for him. It's whether that parody of Nigel Farage, spot the joker, so to speak, is damaging to Nigel Farage's and UKIP's image. And on that second question, I don't think you can be so confident.
Briefly?
Just very briefly, there is a conception that, UKIP are widely disdained in the electorate. I think actually the effect is more polarising. You've basically got around 15% of the electorate that really, really likes UKIP and a larger number of voters who don't like UKIP at all.
Yes.
But it's not the case that, Nigel Farage is widely loathed and this party is widely dissatisfied.
We'll be talking a lot more about this, Matthew. Matthew Goodwin. Thank you for being with us.
He tweeted, didn't he?